Okay, good morning. So we're up to Siman Reish Beis Halacha Yud Beis. Today we'll discuss what bracha do you make on cooking apples. So in other words, there are some apples or some fruits which really are only eaten if they're cooked. Yeah, those are sharp, very bitter cooking apples. Or baking apples, I think they're called. You put them in the oven. You can make a baked apple. That's very good. But if it's eaten raw, you can't really eat it. It's too bitter. So what bracha do you make on that? Says the Mechaber in Reish Beis Yud Beis. Kol ha-peirus shetovim Chaim umuvushalim. Any fruit which are good, whether they're eaten raw or cooked. Kagoin tapuchim va'agosim, for example, apples and pears. Bein Chaim, bein uvushalim. Whether you eat them raw, whether you eat them cooked, mavarich ber praise. You always make a ber praise. However, v'emein derech la'ochlam Chaim elam uvushalim. If you only eat them cooked but not raw, ochlam kashem Chaim mavarich shahakol. When you eat them raw, you make a shahakol. Kashem uvushalim. But when you eat them cooked, you make a ber praise. So if you've got a baking apple which cannot really be eaten raw because it's too bitter, sharp, or whatever, so then you would make a shahakal on that if you were to eat it. It says in the Mishnah Berurah, "Shetovim Chaim uvushalim, va'afilu heim tovim yosek shem uvushalim." You've got some fruits which like imagine a pear. A pear you can have raw, or you can sometimes cook it in a nice syrup or something like that. So maybe even they're better if they're muvushalim. Kiven sheshem Chaim tovim gamkeim. But since they're still good when they're eaten raw. And many people eat them like that. You make a ber pro'etz, whether it's raw or whether it's cooked. Kugoyin tapuchim va'agosim, shekorin bernas, she'oichson peirus tovim gamkein lechol kshem chaim, because they're good when they're raw as well. V'yesh mini tapuchim, and then you got types of apples, shem chamutzim, they're very bitter. Ve'ein ru'uyin lechol l'rov bnei adam kshem chaim, and most people can't eat them raw. Rak alidei bishul, the only way to eat them is by cooking them. Mavarich shahakol kashem chaim. V'ayin lekamen sim reish gimel Mishnah Berurah sif cotton hay le'inyan tapuche ya'ar, some sorts of forest apples. V'im derech rotzolei mashe rov bnei adam oichlen oison kashem mavushalim. Kashem chaim, then you make a shahakol. Now, says Mishnah Berurah sif cotton samach daled, hatam, the reason why you can make shahakol is since the way you eat these fruit, like baking apples, is only through when they're baked or cooked, until they come to that stage of being baked, they haven't got the status of a fruit. And therefore, before that, you therefore only make a shahakol. Fine. If you look at number 72, he says, Mikol Mokum, if, however, on a baked apple, if you eat it raw, though you should have made a shahakol, in Beirech Ber Proetz, Kosovo Lekaman Sheyotz B'diavad. B'diavad you are Yotza. However, regarding unripe apples, he says, we said previously in Yud Beis, Shemavarich Olav Beir Prihadoma. So why? Why is the difference with unripe apples you make a Beir Prihadoma, yet cooking apples, if you eat them raw, you make a shahakol? He says the following, Mishum Shekol Dova Shegidl Al Ha'ilon Ve'in Ika Pri Berchosa Beir Prihadoma. Anything which grows on a tree, but that's not the Ika Pri, yeah, you make a ber priadoma, so therefore it's not yet the ikar pri. It's going to go into it. Masha'inke, the point over there with the cooking apples is that it's only a pri when you actually cook it. Until that point, it's nothing. It's just food. It's not really even an apple. That's the point. So let's just finish samachay and then I'll summarize. Samachay kashem v'shalim ber pro'etz v'uadin im hayel hepach. It could be the other way around as well. Sometimes you have fruit which you can only eat them raw. For example, nuts. You have nuts raw, you don't cook them. Therefore, you only make a ber pro'etz when they're eaten raw. If you decide to cook some nuts or something, then you make shahakol, a bracha achrein, a ber nefashos, afilu yisram b'shivas aminim b'chiyai gavna. Okay, so what comes out of this is as follows: that when it comes to baking apples which cannot be eaten raw, then you only make a ber pro'etz when they're actually baked or cooked. But if they're eaten raw, you make a shahakol. Masha'enkein, other fruit which can be eaten either raw or cooked, then you always make a ber pro'etz. Good. Let's do Yud Gimel. Egoiz gomor hamatugim bidvash. Now we're back to the nuts. The nuts are eaten raw, and therefore you make a ber pro'etz on nuts. The general rule, by the way, for nuts is all nuts pretty much a ber pro'etz. There are some nuts which are ber priadoma. For example, peanuts. For example, garinim. There you make a ber adoma, but otherwise the general rule is all nuts are ber eitz apart from peanuts and garinim. That's the general klal. Ego is gomur hamatug midvash. But what if you take nuts and you fry them in honey, v'nikra niundi, whatever that is, rotzolema nuat, whatever that is, mavarich olav ber eitz. There you still make a ber eitz. Now why is that? Says the Mishnah Berurah Samach Vav, rotzolema nuat pirush shekva nigmar gidulay. The nut is fully formed, or poitzeim oisai, and you break it open. V'zarkim menu aklipa, you discard the shell. Shika eitz, which is like wood. V'loikrin hagarin v'matagnin b'dvash, and you take the actual nut and you fry it in honey. V'nikra beloshin ashkenaz niut. Mavarich olav, on that we say you make a ber eitz. V'afal gav de be'goizim darken ekel chaim. Even though we said just now that normally you eat nuts raw. And if you cook, if you boil them in water, they will worsen. They will deteriorate. However, when you fry them in honey, that is an upgrade. That it makes them better. And therefore they take the status of what we said in Yud Beis, that you can eat them raw or cooked, and therefore you make a ber eitz on fried nuts, which are very clearly nuts. They haven't sort of been pulverized into like a liquid form. The gam kamash melon the lo amrin bezeh da dvash ikka, and also the chiddush is you don't say that the dvash, the honey, is the ikka. V'levarich ale birchas shahakol kabrichas advash, make a shahakol on it. You don't say that. Or could move ke'ein bein zeh siman reish heis sif aleph ba'agom to bezeh dein advash bobish fil atzmai, because you're not eating the honey for itself. You want the nuts. It's just that you're enhancing the nuts by making by frying it in honey. Ki im bishvil it's in tam be'egois. You're flavoring the nuts. V'havelei ha'egois ikka v'advash tafel mevarchim ber eitz, and therefore you make a ber eitz on that. V'uadin common peres b'chei gavna, if you have like a toffee apple. Remember those? Yeah, in the fun fair, that you take an apple and you cover it in honey, whatever it was, toffee, I suppose. Again, it's a ber eitz because the ikka is the the ikka is. I'm talking about the candy floss. I'm talking about the kosher fairs. The kosher fairs, yeah. The bezeh ein advash bobish fil atzmai ki im bishvil litain tam hoegos. Havelei hoegos ikka v'advash tov m'rachim abreiz. V'hu adin komini peres b'chia gavna pre eitz a pre adom shedarken echol rak chaim. V'imoy mevashta b'mayim hoy mishtane b'rchos ha'shahakol. V'imtzigim b'shem and advash mevarich b'rchos ha'ariyo lohen. So, okay, let's just finish and then I'll summarize. Ber eitz kosu achreidim dafidu ein hoegos sholim. Even if the nut is not full, ela kosus v'shavu, you crush it. Which is the way you do it when you fry it. Even though it can't be totally pulverized. You've got to see the bits of nuts to make a bracha on it. Because if you've crushed it so much that you can't recognize its surah, its shape, so what comes out from this sif is this, that nuts, you make a ber eitz. If you cook them and in water and you've taken away their flavor and whatever, then you make a shahakol. But the nuts that we fry, for example, you make it like a nut bar. Yeah, you can imagine with hazelnuts and almonds and things like that, and you add toffee and honey and sweet things. Then, if you can recognize the actual nuts, for sure you make a ber eitz. And now the shaila is, I don't know if you've seen the naked bars. Do you have those? You see those like fruit bars? So then it's interesting because that's sort of just crushed and pressed and is pulverized. And the you make a shahakal, but there are some flavors where you actually see the nuts in it. So if you see the nuts and it's quite clear, then the normal rule applies and you make a ber eitz. Much the same as we discussed yesterday, if you have applesauce and you see bits of apples, you make a ber eitz on it. If it's liquidized so much that it's like a liquid, then you make a shahakal.
Tropicana with the bits.
So that's what we said yesterday. So Tropicana with the bits. Yeah, but if you see the bits, the person seems to say you make a ber eitz. If it's totally smooth, then you make a thing. Okay, maybe there are different opinions about that, but that's what came out. If you see the bits of the orange, then it seems to be that you make a ber eitz, and if it's a pure smooth, then you make a shahakal. That's what we saw, and therefore who out in with this? If you see the nuts, if it's a nut bar and you can see the nuts clearly, then for sure you should make a ber eitz.
The naked bar is the kind of tough. Nuts are only 30%, 40% of it. It says on the back dates. So
yeah, but dates are also ber eitz. I see. Yeah. Okay, say that.